Hey, good afternoon, college students. Hope your day is going well on this Friday. I hope you got my announcements. I hope I appreciate your understanding about me being gone yesterday. This time yesterday, I didn't end up having to have surgery on that skin cancer spot. He ended up just freezing it, so that was nice. I don't know if I told you that's why I was gone yesterday, but that's nice. That was a pleasant surprise. But that's what I was doing about this time yesterday, or maybe shortly before. I did answer some messages while I was at the doctor's. Anyway, let me tell you this: you guys are kind of on a roll of getting good messages here. In that, I keep adjusting things. First of all, your first test is next week, and so during my office hours this morning, I was kind of thinking about the difficulty of this course when you try to design a test is you've covered a mountain of material. So how do you come up with an assessment that measures that kids have at least been trying to digest a good chunk of it? So the two questions, so you're going to have two essay questions for your test. That's it next week. There'll be extended responses, of course, and you'll have resources available because we're in a virtual setting to answer those questions. And the two questions that I'm kind of thinking of that I'm not going to give you yet, okay, as I thought about those questions, it occurred to me that we don't need to move on to chapter 4 just yet. That we should probably save chapter 4 for the revolutionary unit, that maybe it fits better there. This first unit is exploration and colonization. So I just want your test to be on the first 3 chapters. But it also occurred to me that there's a lecture I should probably give on colonial slavery. That'll help really fill in some of the blanks of this question, of one of the questions that I'm thinking of asking you. So as a consequence, you were going to have chapter 4 questions to work on this weekend, but now you don't. So you're going to have a nice weekend. Now, the disadvantage of that is I'm going to give you back-to-back Zoom lectures. Okay, I'm going to give you a lecture today for about 30 minutes on New England colonies, and on Monday I want to give you a lecture on colonial slavery. And then I want to do an activity or two about that, and then prepare you for your test. On Wednesday, I want to give you, kind of present to you the materials, kind of narrow some things down that'll help you prepare to have available for that test. There's going to be an open note test, obviously. It's kind of like, maybe it's more like an essay or 2 essays you're completing for me, okay? But I think it would help you to know what you need for that. So that'll be the plan on Wednesday. Okay? So no homework over the weekend. What's that?
Is it gonna be like timed?
No, it won't be timed. Now here's the thing, during the Zoom sessions, you'll be expected to work on it, and you'll be with me, and I'll need to see your faces, and I'll just assume you're working on it, and you can ask me questions during those sessions. Okay, but you'll also have time beyond that. Basically, you'll have through the weekend to wrap it up. Okay? And I'm gonna have to assume you're not cheating and all those things. Okay? I can kind of tell how you write at this point. All right? So even the tests I give in class for this, most of the time when I give a test in class, like when we're in session, a lot of times I give 2 days and the kids are still writing fiercely at the end of Friday, and I end up saying, okay, you can come in on Monday after school and finish. So maybe I shouldn't do that, but that's what I often end up doing. Just understand, when we go back to a regular classroom setting, it won't be open note, open book. It'll be information you will have studied. So that'll be a little more of a challenge. Okay? All right, so I'm going to dive into my lecture now. And if you don't like me doing this, too bad. I want to do this occasionally, because it does save me time, recording it on my own and coming up with it on my own. This is kind of a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, for me, time-wise. And I feel like I'm going through 1st year of teaching doing this. I'm dealing with this constantly. I just feel like I'm constantly working right now, even yesterday when I wasn't at the doctor's. So anyway, so the lecture today is about New England colonies, giving you some more details into that. A lot of this was in chapter 3 of your text, but it may be some additional information that I want to share with you. So let me get started here, and I'm going to go about 30 minutes and then I'll stop, okay? So I'm going to share my screen. Matter of fact, let me get my timer going so I don't go over. Now, I said about 30 minutes just because, I don't want to end awkward. I don't want to end in the middle of a sentence. So if there's a point I need to wrap up, please bear with me while I do that. So I've started my timer, kids, so I won't go any longer than what I'm saying. Okay. So I want to focus on, I still got chapter 3 of the American Pageant on there. I put the wrong textbook title on there. It should be Open Stacks, right? I did revise this. I've been revising it yesterday and today, but we used to use the American Pageant as a text. So I want to focus on US 1, New England colonies, and we're focusing on, if we talk about New England colonies, right, then we're talking about settling the northern colonies, right? And our years are pretty much 1619 to 1700. Okay. Sometimes I present themes with my lectures. So like for me, sometimes I need to narrow down my focus. So I'm like, okay, so what do I need to focus upon? So then I might just list some things, and I call those like my themes of the lecture, right? So someone brought this up the other day in comments or a question on assignments, and why are people coming to the New World, right? With Spain, profit is the clear motive, right? Gold and other sources of profit. I think with the New England colonies and maybe some of the other colonies, the Dutch and explorers and all those things, French, although French is largely profit through the fur trade. But I think with the New England colonies, you find definitely a lot of different motivations. And I think with New England colonies, or the English colonies, because Virginia is not New England, English colonies, religion is a key motivator, right? Religion is going to be a key factor. People are seeking freedom of religion, or maybe escape from persecution of their religion. Okay, so we want to look at that as a key motivator. And then I want to present some of the early histories. We want to look at the Plymouth colony. We want to look at the Massachusetts Bay colony, which Plymouth will eventually be absorbed into, but for a while they were separate. We want to look at New England society. The goals of New England were to create an ideal society. And this is where religion comes in as a motivator too, right? The idea that, we're Christian people, we're Puritans are a key factor here. We want to create an ideal society that everybody should live up to. Okay. And then we want to create, and then I want to look at interactions between colonists and Native Americans in New England. Okay. All right. Just want to make sure I'm recording this. I'm recording this so you can look at it later if you need to. Okay, so a little bit of background here. Let's take a look at major religions in Europe around 1600. And this was a good map that I thought provided that. A little bit of background. And maybe you know this, maybe you don't. I am by no means an expert on European history. I did take one course on it in college, but that was many moons ago. But anyway, in the 1530s, King Henry VIII of England established the Anglican Church, otherwise known as the Church of England. It is now called the Episcopalian Church today. So if any of you are Episcopalian, this is the origin of your church, okay? So he basically established this because he wanted to be able to divorce people, right? Henry VIII was actually a devout Catholic, but he wanted to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, after she had failed to produce a male heir, right? And he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. The Pope and the Catholic faith, who are very critical of divorce, don't like divorce, said, nope, you can't do this. So King Henry said, well, fine, I'll just form my own church then, right? And so the Anglican Church broke away from the Church of England. King Henry created the Church of England, okay, with himself as the head. So there's no separation of church and state here, right? Okay. So let's take a look at this map just to kind of get an idea of why this will all tie into what we're talking about in a moment, but this gives you kind of an idea of the major religions of Europe in 1600. And you still do see a lot of dominance of the Catholic faith. I mean, if you look at the colors here, this white, this is all Roman Catholic, so still dominating much of Western Europe and on into Ireland, of course. But even this brown is Roman Catholic, but there are some Protestant minority groups forming there, Protestant faiths that are protesting the teachings of the Catholic Church, or at least some of them. The Lutheran Church, remember Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, which he issued in 1517, right? So the Lutheran Church dominating much of Northern Europe, Sweden and Norway and places like that. You've got some other offshoots. Scotland, you've got Calvinist. Orthodox, I don't know if you know what that is, but that's often kind of considered the Eastern version of the Catholic faith, kind of like the Eastern Orthodox Church. And then, of course, you have Muslim empires and the Muslim faith dominating Northern Africa and the Middle East. Okay, the Ottoman Empire is a Muslim empire. Okay, so still definitely a heavy presence of Catholicism, right? But here we have King Henry, right, creating his Anglican Church, right, in England. Now, his reforms are going to spur, right, or inspire other reforms, people who want to reform things even further. And one group to mention here is the Puritans, right? The Puritans, their goal is to purify the Church of England, and they want to eliminate what they call corrupting Catholic influences, right? So they want to completely remove those, okay? Basically what's going on is Henry VIII's separation from the Church of England is emboldening these further separations, right? If England can separate from the Catholic Church, why can't they, Puritans, reform the church even more? Okay, and some of the things that they thought should be done is they felt that membership should be limited. They felt that membership should be stingy. That really the only people who belong in this faith are those who are saints. And how do you tell a saint? A saint is anybody who clearly demonstrates that they've been converted. So they're very pious, right? They do things that are considered to be right according to Christians. Okay. Now, initially, Puritans are wanting to work within the Church of England. They want to continue to reform the Church of England. We don't see them leaving just yet. But there is a group, perhaps sect, S-E-C-T, of the Puritan faith that wants to go further than the initial puritanical reforms of the Catholic or Anglican Church, okay? And that is the Pilgrims, okay? We've all heard of the Pilgrims, right? The Pilgrims agree with the goals of the Puritans, but they believe they must separate from the Anglican Church. So they want to completely leave it. Basically, they believe that the Church of England had, and I'm looking at my notes here, you can tell at times I'm looking at my notes, but they believe that the Church of England had corrupting Catholic influences and was allowing too many of its king's subjects into the church, right? That only visible saints should be admitted. So once again, people who are clearly pious and beyond reproach, right? Okay. Clearly pious, clearly holy. Okay. They resented sharing pews with those who clearly had not been converted. So maybe like those, like most people who go to church, right? They're lukewarm, right? They may not be gung ho, but they're there, right? You know, going through the motions, so to speak. They didn't want to share the pews with those people. Okay, so they wanted complete separation from the Anglican Church, which not all Puritans were advocating. Most Puritans still wanted to stay in England. You know, it's hard to leave your country, right? Okay, so they just think it's too corrupt and they got to leave. So they're going to take action. So they take action. The first place they go to is not the New World. They go to the Netherlands. So let's go back to our map for a moment. So let's see. They go to the Netherlands, they go to right in this region here, so north of Belgium. Okay, now notice, kids, this is all Germany, or what will become Germany, and this time period is called the Holy Roman Empire, right? Okay, so this is where the Pilgrims are going to go first. So they're going to leave England and they're going to settle north of Belgium in the Netherlands, and they're going to go there about 1608. They're going to settle in Holland, north of Belgium, once again, west of Germany. But they became distressed about things there. They were concerned to quote, I'm going to quote this here, they were distressed by the Dutchification of their children, right? That the people were becoming too Dutch or too much like the Netherlanders, right? So they wanted a place where they could be English men and women as well as Puritan Protestants. So what's the solution? Well, we just need to go and create a place for ourselves with no outside influence. And so the only answer to that is to go to North America, right? Go create our own colony. So they're going to negotiate with the Virginia Company to establish a settlement north of Virginia. Now remember, most of these colonies are being settled by companies, joint stock companies, where people invest in them and they go and they settle, and the investors are supposed to get some of the profits. So representatives of the Pilgrims, they go to the Virginia Company, say, hey, we want to start a colony. Virginia Company says, fine, we'll let you settle north of Virginia and we'll fund it. and you'll have to share some of the profits with us and all that stuff. So instead, now they end up going way north of Virginia. They're going to settle at Plymouth Plantation in 1620, and they're going to settle at a place where they really have no legal claim to. So they're essentially squatters, or people who take land that's really not theirs to take, but they gain possession of it simply by sitting on it or squatting on it. Okay, so they had no legal authority to take the land they did, but they did. Okay. And when they arrived there, they gave thanks to God that apparent disease had wiped out the Indians who were settling there. So interesting that you would thank God for that, but that's an actual recorded prayer that the Pilgrims made when they landed. So here's where they landed, right, in 1620. So here we see the first landing of the Mayflower. If you know anything about your geography in the United States, you'll recognize this as being Massachusetts. So this whole area is going to become Massachusetts on up into here. But here's the first landing of the Mayflower, and then here's where they settled. So if there was a Plymouth Rock, kids, that Plymouth Rock must have been here. Boom, we just hit a rock, right? But hey, let's go live here, right? So they're going to land at Plymouth in 1620. And then once again, Plymouth and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which you see forming in 1630 here, eventually they're going to become Massachusetts. But for a while, they're separate colonies. Now, what some things to praise about the Pilgrims, of course, is one thing to praise is this as a concept of representative democracy. Okay. So when they arrive, they create a compact, and this is called the Mayflower Compact, right? So it's signed by all men on the Mayflower, one of their ships. They're going to declare support for, they're still going to declare loyalty to the king. And England is a constitutional monarchy at this point. They have a parliament, okay? So they're going to still declare their loyalty to King James, but they're going to create a government to establish rules for the colony. And this is often considered an important step towards self-government, because what they're creating is a civil body politic, okay? A politic that represents the people and is governed by the people, at least to some degree, okay? And guys, always feel free to speak up and let me know if I'm going too fast. This is going to be recorded, so you can listen to it later. Hopefully you're all there and not checking out on me, but trying to listen to this and get some of this information down. Now notice the Mayflower Compact is pretty short. It's not a tremendous document. It's not nearly as big as our own Constitution, even though our own Constitution isn't that big compared to some others. But the key wording here, as I bolded for you, is that they want to be a civil body politic, right? Meaning a body that has some degree of government representation, or a government run in which representation and decisions are made by the people, or people who are elected to make decisions for the people. So there's a legacy of representative democracy here with the Mayflower Compact. Okay. Didn't read it to you. Sorry. I know maybe you would have liked me to. Okay. But the significance of the Mayflower Compact is that it expressed a deep faith in God and divine guidance. These are puritanical people. So we're not going to see separation of church and state here. This is a theocracy, but it's meant to be a representative theocracy, I guess. Deep loyalty to England and the king, and a mutual regard for one another as equals. Once again, that civil body politic. The Puritans are trying to create a system in which perhaps one class exists, not extreme poverty, not extreme wealth. Okay. So they express an intent to create just and equal laws in a democratic form of government, a government based upon the consent of the people. Well, it's kind of neat that you see in these settlements, and of course we talk about things that colonists do wrong, and exploitation of Indians and slavery and all those things, and these are tragic things. Some of these evils still remain a part of our society today. So, sometimes we can't be too present test. We do need to mention legacies that are positive, and what we see is this democratic tradition being brought over to North America, and that's that I would argue is a very positive legacy of the Pilgrims. Continuing with some of the story of the Pilgrims here. So initial settlements are 24 families and 102 settlers. The first winter was brutal, by the way. The winter of 1620 to 1621, only 49, according to my notes here, only 49 out of the 102 survived, yet no one left. I mean, they're leaving through death, but they're not leaving to go back. Autumn of 1621, things are better. Relationships with Native Americans have been established. This is when we see our first Thanksgiving. Okay, as August of 1621, or what we tend to think of as our first Thanksgiving. Now, leadership is always important. We talked about John Smith with Jamestown, right? A key leader of Plymouth is William Bradford, who you see pictured here with the beautiful mustache, right? William Bradford will be elected governor. He's a prominent leader of the early colony. He's a successful leader. He'll be elected governor. They had annual elections for governor, and he'll be elected 30 times in annual elections. So they must have liked his leadership, right? And he's got two key concerns. He fears the corrupting influences of arriving colonies, or arriving colonists, I should say, particularly in neighboring communities. You're going to have the Massachusetts Bay Colony forming above. You're going to have eventually Rhode Island and Connecticut, right? So he gets concerned about those corrupting influences coming in there. And then he's also concerned about Native Americans. He's concerned about fighting with Native Americans. He wants his colony to survive, right? Well, he's going to skillfully negotiate with Native Americans and maintain peaceful relations, at least for a while. We know they won't last. And there are two local Indians who are going to help in this process. You probably know the Thanksgiving story. Maybe you had to act it out in elementary, so I apologize if this is very repetitive, but there are two Indians, right, who are going to be key here. One is Squanto, right? Now, once again, it seems like I keep bringing up people who like movies should be made up about, right? John Smith, maybe Sir Francis Drake, right? And now we've got Squanto. Listen to the adventures of Squanto. Now, Squanto was a member of the Patuxet tribe, Patuxet. He had been kidnapped and taken to Spain, right? Spent time in slavery, escaped slavery, made it back to North America, right? And then had these interactions with the Pilgrims towards the end of his life, okay? And the reason why he's able to act as an interpreter is because he knows English, because he spent time in Europe. Okay, he probably knows Spanish too, right? So, he's one of these extraordinary individuals in this time period. Like, how did you survive all this stuff, especially with the amount of diseases that were just working their way through Native Americans, right? Now, tragically, he's going to die of a fever in 1622 while negotiating with William Bradford, or representing William Bradford. So he does perhaps die of disease. He dies of a fever in 1622. But had quite an adventurous life along the way. He is key in helping them teach, the Pilgrims don't survive. Many of the early colonists, Jamestown even, they don't survive without the help of Native Americans, and Squanto is helping them plant corn and squash. Another key Native American representative, another key negotiator is Massasoit. Okay, he's a Wampanoag leader. And he will sign a treaty of friendship with the Pilgrims. Okay, and this is very key for William Bradford, who wanted to prevent conflict with Indians at this point. Okay, so trying to allow his colonies to survive. We don't want Native Americans, killing his people. So smart at this point, and maybe it's tragic that these relations don't last. I mentioned this earlier, but in 1621, they celebrated their first Thanksgiving following their harvest. There were some Native Americans who were there. So this is kind of seen as, a great event in the American lexicon of history, right? You see it very idealized here in this image, right? Okay, Native Americans and, Europeans sharing food together, right? And Plymouth will remain a very small but important settlement in New England. It does, as you know by now, eventually get absorbed into Massachusetts and the state of Massachusetts. Okay, so some little bit more discussion about English migration, and we just talked about the Pilgrims, and they basically came over. What are their prime motivations? You don't really see profit as a very large motive, right? Their motivation is religion. Now, they do have to make some profit. They have investors and things like that, but that's not their main drive. But here we see English migration in these years to the New World, so-called, dramatically increasing, right? And there are some reasons for that. One of those, again, is religious persecution. Persecution in England led to dramatic increases in settlement. And this, I thought, was a good map here. It kind of tells you where they're going. A lot are going to the West Indies, Bermuda, right, Chesapeake, and then, of course, New England, or what is becoming New England. And by 1700, so we're getting closer and closer to the dawn of the United States, right? 1776. By 1700, New England's population is 91,000. Okay, so they're coming for religious persecution, but of course they're coming for other reasons too. Not everybody is leaving for religious persecution, and I would argue that that's probably not the main motivation for most people's. For most people's, it's poverty, right? The continued poor conditions in Europe, England in particular. Once again, remember that article you read by Dr. Stannard, right? Describing the conditions in England. There's plenty of incentives to leave, okay, if you're looking for opportunity. Here's kind of a map to kind of give you an indicator of that, or a graph, I should say. Okay, if you can look at the decline of living standards in England from 1500 to 1700, it's pretty significant, right? Living standards declined along with wages. There were some plagues at various times in this time period, and I thought this was a good graph at that index of real wages. I'm no statistician. I'm not exactly sure how you interpret these numbers besides the years down here. Okay, but you see a precipitous decline in wages and therefore standard of living, of course. Also, you've got a tremendous population increase going on in England, and land is becoming more scarce. So these are strong incentives to move, right? Yeah, maybe it's a religion, but hey, I'd like some land, and I would sure like to live better than how I'm living. Okay, all right. So colonization is seen as a way to address these problems. And for England, for the English government, if we had time, I'd have you read an article by a professor known by the professor with the name of Paige Smith. And her article From These Beginnings describes that many of the people coming to America were kind of the lowest of the low. They were poor, they were convicts, and they were looking for a second chance, okay? And for England, this is like, yeah, go. If you survive, great. If you don't, we really don't want you anyway. So for in many cases, this was a way for England to kind of get rid of its undesirables, right? At least that was how they felt about them. Okay. So once again, reasons for English colonization: fleeing religious persecution, economic opportunity, labor needs in the New World as the colonies became successful. And then England is encouraging this. England is go, get out, right? Go, live your life. It's great over there. They're not telling them any of the hardships, right? So go, here's your chance. Okay, so here's another map, a lot of maps in this lecture, I guess. Okay. So here is, what's becoming New England. Here's the Plymouth colony. I want to spend a little bit of time. I've got about 8 minutes or so here. I want to spend a little bit of time on the Massachusetts Bay colony. Okay, so let's kind of transition to that. Now notice here on this map, I think there's some other things to point out, some major communities that maybe you've heard of in colonial history. Plymouth, of course, Boston, maybe you've heard of Boston, Salem, the Salem witch trials, right? I'm not going to get into that today, but I'm sure you've heard of those. And then, but the other thing to mention here is the presence of some major Indian tribes: the Wampanoag, the Massachusetts, the Pennacook, the Nipmuc, Pocumtuck, and the Mohican. I'm sure you've heard of the Mohicans. So these are actually major Indian confederacies that control some smaller tribes beneath them. So the conflict potential is there. Okay. All right. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, what will become the state of Massachusetts. Key leader to mention here is John Winthrop. He's going to serve as governor. He's a preacher who serves as governor, so maybe no separation. Really, Massachusetts Bay, there is no separation of church and state. So he's a preacher who's going to serve as governor. He led the first wave of colonies to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630, and he'll be governor, let's see, for 12 of the first 20 years. So kind of like William Bradford, he's getting elected to office quite a bit. I think their elections were annual too, but don't quote me on that. Now, one of the themes of my lecture was this idea of creating kind of this ideal society, right? This ideal society before God, an example to the world of how an ideal society should live, right? And he really kind of advocates this in his sermon called A City Upon a Hill. Or he uses this phrase, city upon a hill, in a sermon called A Model of Christian Charity. And that phrase occasionally still comes up. You might still hear a politician say that at times, city upon a hill. The United States should be a city upon a hill, a model for other nations to follow. That began with John Winthrop, okay? So what is he advocating for? He wants a model of Christian charity. He outlined the goals of Puritan settlers. He wants to establish a religious utopia dedicated to the teachings of Christianity. To be successful, all would have to work together. So this is a little bit of a communal lifestyle. Everybody's got to have their role. Everybody's got to get it done. Everybody's got to be pious. Okay, we can't do this alone. Okay, if they succeeded, they would be a model for others. But if they failed, they would bring shame to themselves and God. Right. So the idea here is you want to create an ideal society that lives up to what God would want, and therefore God will reward them. Okay, I'm going to show you his speech really quick here. His speech, kind of like the other primary documents I've shown you today, not very long at all, right? And really this is a sermon. And if you read through it, I'm not going to do that to you. It's a lot of old English, you know, look how we is spelled there, right? But if you read through it, it's not a lot of fire and brimstone. It talks about how God will reward you if you do this and how we can live a great life. There's a little bit of fire and brimstone in there, like if you don't do this, you could go to hell. But it's actually a pretty positive speech, which is kind of unusual. A lot of preachers in this time period were all about hell and Satan. But John Winthrop's maybe a more positive vision, but very tough to live up to, right? And has some consequences that leads to things like the Salem witch trials, right? Okay. All right, so once again, just some points on this. There's no separation of church and state in New England, right? Or in New England colonies, at least at this point. Definitely not in the Massachusetts Bay colonies, right? Okay. Taxes will fund ministers' salaries. They also fund church salaries, okay? Right? I mean, imagine if our taxes went to preachers. I wouldn't be happy about that, right? I believe in separated church and state. I don't like where some of my taxes go now, right? So, but in this time period, your preachers may very well be your governor, okay? They also had a lot of blue laws. I don't know if you know what blue laws are, but these are laws designed to enforce morality and prohibit certain activities, right? We have some of those still today. In Ohio today, you still can't sell certain forms of alcohol until 1 p.m. on a Sunday, right? So we still have some blue laws in our existence in 2020. Blue laws in Massachusetts, okay, New England colonies, church attendance, right? You had to go. They also prohibited drunkenness, card playing, okay, public kissing, things like that. And you would actually be surprised in a lot of rural communities in the United States today, some of the laws you might encounter, like regulating behavior in the bedroom even. I don't know how they would enforce those, but some of those are still on the books. It's actually quite shocking, okay? I didn't take the time to research it before this lecture, but they're out there. Okay, now let me close with this. I've got about 4 minutes here. Not everybody, of course, wanted to live this way. So you do have some dissenters, and perhaps one of the more famous one of those is Roger Williams. Roger Williams is himself a minister, but he's not like a everybody must do this minister. I would call him to be more open-minded, a more open-minded minister. So he's a minister who called for separation of church and state, very popular, good preacher. He is a separatist, right? He wanted a complete separation from the Church of England, but he feels like if you look at what's happening here, you've got religious persecution going on in England, and then the Puritans come to North America, and they're kind of doing the same thing, right? It's just their version of religious persecution. I'm not saying everything they're saying is bad, but if you don't conform, they might accuse you of being a witch and hang you, okay? So Roger Williams has some issue with that. We're trading one form of religious persecution with another, right? And he actually declared that the Massachusetts Bay Colony, he was actually sympathetic to the needs of Indians, right? He declared that the Massachusetts Bay Colony had no legal right to own land. You didn't compensate these Native Americans fairly. You just took their land, and this is why we're having conflict at times and things like that. He felt that the Indians should have been more compensated. So that's an interesting voice in this time period, right? I hear a lot of Englishmen saying that, okay? So he's going to be banished in 1635, right? Hey, you don't like our religion, or you're going to criticize it, and you're going to try and be friendly with Native Americans? We don't want you. So he's banished, and he moves to Providence, and he began his own colony in 1636. And that, as you may know, based on the word Providence, that is the colony of Rhode Island, okay? So he creates this teeny tiny colony down here. If you're looking at me now, this little teal guy down here remains our smallest state today. of Rhode Island. And this is actually a good map. If you look, guys, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but Maine used to be part of Massachusetts, right? It'll later become its own. We'll get to that. And we've got Vermont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut, which I may not get to Connecticut today. Okay. Let me finish up Rhode Island here. So with permission from the English crown, he purchased land from the Narragansetts and the Wampanoags, and he purchased land, and Roger Williams probably compensated them fairly. I don't have records on that, but I would guess that he did. Okay, he's going to establish the First Baptist Church. Now, the Baptist churches can be pretty fundamental these days, but in Roger Williams, Rhode Island, there will be freedom of religion. There will be freedom of religion for Catholics, for Jews, for Quakers, right? You can be any faith you want, okay? Native Americans will be respected, at least to some degree, and he implemented, sorry ladies, male property suffrage. So if you're a male and you own property, you could vote. Still excluding women and actually excluding males without property here from voting too. But in many respects, a much more open-minded colony than some of the others. Now, of course, the more pious colonies, Massachusetts Bay and so forth, are going to call Rhode Island the Rhode Island sewer, right? It's where the people go who are less pious than us. Okay. All right. I do have to mention one more dissenter and then I'm done. I'm right at 30 minutes right now, a little bit over, but this is still Rhode Island. So let me finish Rhode Island here. I want to mention Anne Hutchinson. Now, Anne Hutchinson is often known as the first feminist. Okay. I know it says she was a mother of 14 children here. You often don't think of a feminist as having that many kids, right? But Anne defied a lot of things. First of all, she claimed that a holy life was no guarantee of salvation. She claimed that only God knows who's going to heaven, right? And you shouldn't presume that just because somebody acts good that they are, right? She wanted her church to be more open. And perhaps the most offensive thing is that she actually preached. And she was a great preacher. She was an intelligent woman. She challenged the authority of ministers. People were attending her sermons. You can imagine how they were alarmed by that, right? And so she was put on trial. And she was put on trial because she kept saying things like, I have been given direct revelations by God. And that's kind of a no-no. I always kind of wonder about that, though, because when you study the Bible or you read the Bible, there's like people left and right getting direct revelations from God, but then it seems like no one else can after it. So I don't know what the thinking is there. Maybe you guys know. But anyway, she'll be criticized for that. She had criticized the ministers for emphasizing good works instead of God's grace. Important to mention that. I am rushing a little bit here to get done. Okay. One critic commented, "You have stepped out of your place. You would have rather been a husband than a wife, a preacher than a hearer, and a magistrate than a subject." In other words, she was challenging the religious and patriarchal society that she was a part of. But she demonstrated a mastery of scripture at trial. And if you read the transcripts, now, of course, they're in Old English, she is definitely holding her own against her inquisitors, right? She is outwitting her inquisitors for days. And this is in 1638 during her trial. Incredibly intelligent woman. But once again, she declared she had received revelations from God, and some of them were pious priests. I was like, oh, that's blasphemy, right? All that stuff. So she will be banished from the colony. Well, of course, where do you go when you're banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony? You go to Rhode Island, right? So she went to Rhode Island. Okay. So many of New England's residents relocated to practice their religion freely. Anne will spend some time in Rhode Island. This is her being escorted out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. These dissenters, exiles, and malcontents formed a colony that became stubbornly independent. Now, I'm referring to Rhode Island here. And Rhode Island has a tradition of being stubbornly independent. They will be the last state to ratify the Constitution, for example. So they kind of have that tradition. Now, Anne's life will end tragically. She'll end up settling in New York, kind of on the frontier in New York. And she'll be attacked by Indians. And her and not all of her children, but everybody but one person in her household at that time will be killed. 6 of her children will be killed. So sad ending for Anne. Gosh darn it. But often there's still a statue of her in, I think, Boston, Massachusetts somewhere. She's often kind of labeled as the first feminist, the first woman, at least in America, to really stand up for women to voice how they feel about things. Okay. All right. So what I didn't get to is there's a couple Native American wars I wanted to mention, and also which deal really with the founding of Connecticut. But I'm going to stop now. I have gone about, I'm at 34:45, so I did go over some. Okay. Now, a couple reminders before you leave me. I'll post these notes, and this will be recorded. If you didn't turn in those primary document questions from the other day, I need those. I haven't started grading them yet, so I don't know if you turn them in. Make sure you turn those in. And also just be aware that you have a test next week. Okay? You will get another lecture from me like this on Monday, and then we'll be doing other things across the week. Monday, I'm going to focus on colonial slavery. Okay? I will post all the notes with this lecture. I just didn't get to present all of them. That's just the way it goes. But you'll have them available if you want to use them on your test next week. I'll post them by Wednesday, if not before. Any questions of me, kids? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do you want? Sorry. Do you want us to like comment a question about this
Oh,
one?
yes, I do. Thank you, Ann. I was going to post that. That's actually ready to post, so it may schedule soon. So it would have posted even if you didn't ask that question. So I'm glad you did. That's a good reminder. So yeah, feel free to post a question or a comment about this. I need you to do so. And I like that. That's my favorite part of this virtual stuff is responding to kids' comments about my lectures, actually. So, okay. Guys, have a great weekend. Take advantage of maybe not too much work on your plate, at least for me this weekend. And take care. Let me know if you have any questions about anything. I'm going to end the meeting now.